Greetings from the Holy Land, the Holy Apple, the Holy Hilltop here in Tapuach. We are on the 6th day of the month of Av 5779. After we've said that this class is for the sake of heaven to remove the divine presence from the exile and to bring the final redemption, this class is also for the speedy recovery of Esther Pollard, who is very ill. Her name, write it down, jot it down, Esther Yochai, Bat, the daughter of Razel Bracha. Esther Yochai, Bat, the daughter of Razel Bracha, who was diagnosed with breast cancer. And also pray for the release, total release of Jonathan Pollard, to be able to take care of his wife and come back to the Holy Land, God willing. Okay, today's class. Let's rebuild the temple. How are we going to do that? Last week, to summarize, quick summary of last week. There are 5 chapters in Lamentations. 4 out of 5 go according to the alphabetical order. A, B, C, D, of course in Hebrew. This corresponds with 22 transgressions. Our rabbis, our sages, bring down in various sources, they bring down 22 transgressions that brought upon the destruction of the first and second temple. One of the 22 transgressions was lack of willingness to sacrifice, self-sacrifice on the part of the Jewish people. Point number 4, summary. In the end of the first temple, the priest went up to the sanctuary, top of the sanctuary, and there they threw up the keys to the holy temple, and they told God that they were not worthy guards of the temple. They did not protect the spirituality of the temple, and here's the keys back. We didn't do a proper job. And they threw the keys up, and then they committed suicide and jumped to their deaths. Following the priests were the Levites, and following the Levites were the young girls. All committed suicide. Suicide? Isn't that a prohibition of the Torah, that Jews are not allowed, or people are not allowed to commit suicide? That is correct. It is forbidden for anyone to commit suicide. However, the Torah, the Talmud, our sources bring down 5 or 6 cases, also brought down in the Torah, also in the Talmud. They bring down 5 or 6 principles where Jews would be able to take their lives in order to save themselves from various outcomes. So, yes, it is forbidden, but there are exceptions to the rules. What we discussed, the 6th point was, we discussed what was the purpose of the priests. What was their job? What were they trying to accomplish in the temple? The idea was that the priests, tribe of Levites, they were supposed to be the mentors, the coaches, the spiritual guides to the Jewish people, our spiritual eyes of the Jewish people. And when they saw that the temple was being destroyed, they realized, they got a wake-up call, that they did not perform their task in a proper fashion. They kind of went bankrupt. And when it hit them, they decided right then and there that up until now we have not done our jobs. But from right now, for this second, we will change that. We will change our direction. And for all generations, till this very moment, they decided that the first temple was destroyed because of lack of self-sacrifice, we will lay the cornerstone, the foundation of the second temple, which will be built through self-sacrifice. So they sacrificed the greatest of all sacrifices, their life, in order to teach the Jewish people that this would be the key to opening, to rebuilding the temple. And look at how successful they were. Their goal was that through their self-sacrifice, through their giving up of their lives, the priests, the Levites, and the women, that would be the foundation, the cornerstone of the second temple. And sure enough, hundreds of years later, in the time that the Greeks ruled over the land of Israel for 180 years in the land of Israel, the Jewish people revolted. And the major characters, the major stars in this revolt were the priests and the Levites and the women. So there was a tremendous effect that these priests, the Levites and the women, there was a tremendous effect that took hold of the Jewish people and gave them the courage and the strength to revolt against the mightiest empire of the time, the Greek Empire, against all odds. They were a minority, tiny minority. But they were successful because those same priests, the same Maccabees, who are from the priestly family, after 180 years of being subservient to the Greeks, declared Jewish sovereignty, Jewish independence over the land of Israel once again, which lasted for approximately 100 years. Once again, they rededicated and purified the second temple, as if it was built again, anew. We asked the question last week, when we talk about sacrifice, are we talking about Jews giving up their lives? That's the sacrifice we mean? It's a pretty big request. And we showed various proofs. There are dozens of proofs, but we showed not so. The Torah, the Talmud, uses the word, the expression, Mesirut Nefesh, of self-sacrifice, not only when a person gives their life, but also when a person sacrifices, when they're willing to sacrifice their time, their honor, their money, their good name, their body, punishment, penalties, for the sake of the Torah, the commandments, the land of Israel, sake of God. So now, that was last week's summary. Now we go on. We want to rebuild. We want to rebuild the temple, the third temple. How are we going to do it? Here's the plan. Here's the plan. Rabbi Shimon bar Yohai brings down in many places in the beginning of the Esther Rabbah, the book Esther Rabbah, in Eicha Rabbah, in the beginning, he writes, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, who lived, of course, in the time of the Romans. He was on the run. He says that the Torah teaches us in 3 different places that a Jew is not allowed to return to Egypt. After the Jewish people suffered slavery in the land of Egypt for 210 years, they are no longer allowed to go back to live in Egypt. 3 different places. So that means there are 3 negative transgressions that if a Jew goes to live in Egypt. Now, then Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, after bringing down the 3 verses where it says straight out you're not allowed to go to live in Egypt. He brings down 3 cases in the Torah Talmud history where Jews violated that transgression of going and living in Egypt, and they paid a dear price for it. One of the events is an amazing story. When did this event take place? There's a dispute exactly when it took place. We know that there were 3 revolts against Rome. The first revolt was before the destruction of the Second Temple. The second revolt, which we will mention, came 65 years after the destruction of the Second Temple, the Bar Kokhba revolt. And according to some opinion, right smack in the middle, there was a third rebellion. So once again, according to this opinion, the first rebellion was before the destruction of the Second Temple with the Zealots. The second rebellion was what I'm about to tell you right now, the story, which happened in Egypt, which of course the Romans ruled various places in the land of Israel and near the land of Israel. One of them happened to be Alexandria. And a third, last but not least, was the revolt of Bar Kokhba. And separating the revolt, according to this opinion, the event which I'm talking about took place approximately 20 years before the revolt of Bar Kokhba. So Bar Kokhba's revolt took place 65 years after the destruction of the Second Temple. This event took approximately 40-45 years after the destruction in Alexandria, Egypt. So listen to this, an amazing story. It was time for the Caesar and his wife, princess, to give birth, and they had a birth of a beautiful son. It happened to turn out that it was the 9th day of Av. Well, this was a time where the Jewish people would be mourning, of course, the destruction of both the first and second temple. So therefore, what do Jews do on the 9th day of Av? Well, they blow out all the candles, and they leave one candle in order to read the scrolls of the Lamentations written by Jeremiah the prophet. So this did not look too good. Imagine that. People are lighting up candles and lighting up the sky, with firecrackers and lights and partying everywhere. And the Jewish people are crying. They ain't partying. They're crying over the fact that the temples were destroyed. What kind of bad luck is that? That it happened to be the birth of the Roman Caesars happened to be born on the 9th day of Av. So it didn't look too good for the Jewish people, but in the end it was forgotten. Lucky for the Jewish people, because the Romans did not take it too lightly, but they let it pass. Okay, let's fast forward. We're going to go fast forward here to the month of Kislev. So we're going fast forward 4 months here. Now it's the time of Hanukkah, the festival of lights. Unfortunately for the Jews, now this baby that was born 4 months ago on the 9th day of Av, now he's deathly sick. Not only is deathly sick, he dies on Hanukkah. The Jewish people of Alexandria, the Jewish community, get together and they have to decide whether they are going to light the candles of Hanukkah or not. They realize that if they light the candles, and the Gentiles, of course, will see this, that Alexandria, the Romans, the Gentiles, are in mourning for the son of the Caesar. They're in darkness, turned off all the candles, blew them out, sitting on the floor, crying, and the Jewish people are lighting up those candles, celebrating. They knew they were endangering their lives. And they had to make a decision. And they decided, both men and women, we will endanger ourselves for the sake of heaven. What will be, will be. They weren't sure of the outcome. They knew they were taking a chance. They knew they were endangering themselves. So they went ahead, and on Hanukkah, as the Gentiles, the Romans, mourned for the loss of the son of the Caesar, the Jews celebrated and lit up the candles of Hanukkah. The Gentiles saw this, and word got back to the Caesar and his wife, and they decided to put an end to this revolt. When they saw the candles of Hanukkah, they understood very well that these were the candles of a revolution. The candles meant revolt. Just like in the real times of the Maccabees, the lights became the symbol, the icon of revolution, of independence, of standing up and fighting. There's an amazing question and answer. The Tzitz Eliezer, one of the leading sages of our day, in our times, he had a 24-volume question and answer responsa. He was asked, why is there no tractate? Why is there no Talmudic tractate for the holiday of Hanukkah? We have a whole volume of Talmud when it comes to the story of Purim. Why don't we have a tractate telling us the story and the laws of Hanukkah? And he says an amazing answer. He says very simply, folks. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who compiled the Mishnah, organized it. He was frightened. There was no way he was going to give a tractate to the story of Hanukkah, because he knew that if the Gentiles, once the Gentiles would get their hands on this, they would understand this as a cry, as a decree of revolution from the Jewish people against the nations who are ruling over them. And there was no way he was going to do that. Candles represent, in the eyes of the Romans, the candles of Hanukkah represented one word: revolt, revolution. And therefore it was too dangerous to write a tractate on the subject. It had to be buried. The idea, the Jewish people had already suffered when they rebelled in the time of the Romans before the destruction of the Second Temple, and after the destruction of the Second Temple in the days of Bar Kokhba. They did not want to hear the words of rebellion, of standing up and fighting, of pride. They wanted to keep it quiet. So the Jews lit the candles, and the Caesar got wind of this, and him and his wife decided to put down the Jewish revolt of the Jews of Alexandria, lighting the Hanukkah candles. And they went and they mowed down and they murdered and they slaughtered the Jewish community of Alexandria, all the men. And then they came up to the women and they said, we give you a chance to live. We allow you to live. just give us the word that you will not follow in the steps of the males, we will allow you to live. The women said, no way, Ray. What you did to the men, you will do to us. Equal rights. And then they killed, just like in Hanukkah, the story of Hanukkah, which involves women, so too in our story in Egypt. Jews of Alexandria, all the women of Alexandria, the Jewish women, were slaughtered and murdered. The question, the obvious question, folks, is what in the world happened there in Egypt? Are these people out of their minds? Are these Jews crazy? We're talking about a rabbinic commandment, lighting the Hanukkah candles. What in the world is a Jew doing, endangering himself, herself, for lighting candles, a rabbinical commandment, and they're endangering their lives for the holy Sabbath, which is a prohibition to desecrate it from the Torah. When it comes to a question of life or death, we desecrate the Sabbath. For candles? What got into these people? What are they, nuts? There are many explanations that our sages give, explaining how they were correct. But I have to tell you the words, amazing words, of Rabbi David Fink. Remember these words, engrave them on your hearts always. In his book on a commentary on the scrolls of Esther, based on a commentary by Rabbi Yonatan Eifshitz, he writes on page 168, I summarize it, listen closely. How could it be, according to Jewish law, how could it be that Mordechai, our hero in the Purim time, before the building of the second temple, how was he, according to Jewish law, allowed to endanger himself, and not only endanger himself, the entire Jewish nation? Because of the fact that he refused to bow down, the entire Jewish people was decided by Haman and the king Achashverosh to annihilate all the Jewish people in one day. How is a Jew, not a simple Jew, Mordechai, a leader of the Jewish community, how was he allowed to do that? Number two, how was Queen Esther allowed to endanger herself by going to the king after not being invited for 30 days? The law was then, if the king had not called a person within 30 days, you had to wait for a personal invitation. She was not called for 30 plus days. She was not allowed to come into the office of the king without his permission. Who gave her permission to endanger herself and the Jewish people perhaps and walk into his office? Not only that, she's after 3 days of fasting. Now Jews, Jews love eating. If you ever notice that, they just love eating. So for a Jew to stop eating, it's like a big deal, man. So you look at a Jew after like an hour after he's fasting, he looks like he's about to, pass out. Remember Red Fox? Oh, this is the big one. This is the big one. I'm coming after you, Ethel. Or whatever his wife's name was. Like they look like they're on their last leg. 2 hours. We're talking about 3 days. You can imagine how bad, how terrible she looked. Esther, you got another 11 months till the Jewish people are going to be destroyed. You got a lot of time to work with. What is the rush? Are you out of your mind? And she endangers herself and possibly the Jewish people. How is that? And then Rabbi Fink reminds us, when we talk about the temple, you could listen today and tomorrow and for the rest of your life, you could hear hundreds, thousands of classes. But these words that you hear right now are missing. Rabbi Fink says, what is the foundation of the Temple Mount? On what foundation does Temple Mount exist? Does it stand on? And we know that the first event, that the dedication, one might say, of the holy mountain, the mountain of Moriah, where the Temple Mount would be built, the dedication, the first ever event was when Isaac willingly went to sacrifice his life for God. He never sacrificed his life. God told him, no. Just the willingness. You were willing to. And Rabbi Fink tells us the tremendous lesson we won't hear. We'll hear thousands of hours of classes. We won't hear the message of self-sacrifice. We won't hear that message. But the foundation of that Temple Mount is Isaac. And Isaac is the willingness to self-sacrifice. Though nothing eventually happened to him. He was willing to go the distance. And then Rabbi Fink points out, in Hebrew, we say that in the temple, we know that, in English, we say that sacrifices, animal sacrifices were brought. In Hebrew, we know that the word is korban. Korban means coming close. How do we come close to God? The temple was a place where a Jew came close to God. How was that? Because after a Jew sinned, when he became distant from God, he realized, or she realized, that whatever was done to the animal, the cutting, the slaughtering, the opening up, the blood, and the cleansing, and the sprinkling, whatever was done to the animal really should have been done to me. But God, in His tremendous mercy that He had on me, on people, He allows me, He gives me this wake-up call to realize what I did. And then, after realizing that this should have been my end right now, what I see, what happened to this animal, that should be me right now. This should be, that's all, folks, my end. Curtains. But it's not. Thank you so much, God. You just brought me back. You resurrected me. I should have been killed because of my sinning and distancing myself from you. But you, in your immense mercy, you have mercy on me, and I'm still going. That brought a person closer to God. So the word korban is to sacrifice, self-sacrifice. The whole base, the whole idea behind the temple is that when you came to Jerusalem and you walked up to Mount Moriah and entered the temple, it gave a person the will and the desire to sacrifice themselves, their time, their money, their honor for God. That was the idea. So therefore, listen to this. He concludes that the Jews of Alexandria, when they were discussing whether they should have self-sacrifice and endanger themselves, they didn't know what the outcome would be. Perhaps they would be killed, perhaps not. When they mourned on the 9th of Av, when the son of the Caesar was born, nothing happened to them. So they weren't sure. But now, when they had to make a decision whether to light the candles, they decided, yes, green light, we're going to go for it. Why? They understood and they believed that their self-sacrifice, both men and women, just like in the end of the first temple, the self-sacrifice of the Levites and the priests and the women led to the revolt and independence and rededication of the temple in the time of the Maccabees, in the time of the Greek occupation of Israel. So too, our self-sacrifice for the holiday of Hanukkah, lighting the lights of the revolt of independence, returning to our Holy Land, returning to the temple. We will light these lights of revolution, of revolt. This will be the foundation of the next temple. The next temple. And folks, they were correct. The foundation of the third temple, which should be built today, this minute, in our times, the foundation of that third temple has been already set in place by the self-sacrifice, by the lighting of the candles of the revolution, of the revolt of those Jews in Alexandria that gave their lives for the commandment of lighting the candles of the revolt of Hanukkah. If you look outside, if you look in our world, and you see unbelievable, miraculous times that we live in, you look at the land of Israel, how is it possible that the land of Israel has turned into such a social, political, military, spiritual power? How could that be? And it really started 300 years ago, when rabbis began to bring with them a handful of families with them. As they said, the redemption is coming closer. They believed that by coming up to the land of Israel, they would bring the redemption closer. The tremendous sacrifice, self-sacrifice of these people. Read some of the stuff that they went through. How many of them died on the way to the land of Israel? How many, when they were in the land of Israel, died from diseases? Being attacked, all kinds of tragedies, calamities. And you look, as the years went by, and more people, more rabbis, more spiritual counselors started bringing their flock back to Israel. And that little drizzle became a rain, and the rain became a tremendous flood. So you think about it. That light, those Hanukkah candles that were lit by the Jews of Alexandria, the Romans understood correctly that those lights of self-sacrifice, that would really bring the rebuilding of the temple. That would bring the independence of the Jewish people, sovereignty over the land of Israel. And throughout the last 300 years, dear friends, the Jewish people have been tremendous self-sacrifice on the way to come to the land of Israel. The settlers that lived here, just look at what Mark Twain has to say when he came to visit Israel in the 1800s. Read his words. Everything here, nothing lived here. It was like Death Valley here. How many Jews have paid with their lives so that we would light those candles of revolution, of independence, of a Jewish state, of Jewish sovereignty? In the Jewish undergrounds preceding the state of Israel, how many Jews gave their lives? Tremendous, brave men and women. It's an amazing thing. If I'm not mistaken, in 1822, it was the January Revolution, called the Poles revolted against the Russians in 1822 in January. And the Ger Rebbe, the Rabbi of Ger, during this time of the revolution, he stood in his room, looking very saddened. And his students came by and they saw the rabbi saddened. And they said, "Rabbi, why is your face fallen? You look so depressed and sad." He says, "I'll tell you, students. Listen to these words that he said. 1822. He said, I see all over the world that countries are trying to go back to their roots. They are trying to reclaim sovereignty like the Polish people. But where do we see Jews wakening themselves up to return to their birthplace, to their country, to their sovereign country? We don't see the Jews. And this is a tremendous accusation," he said, "against the Jewish people. That's why I'm saddened." So folks, think about it. The Jews were the last to raise the flag of revolution, of coming back home, regaining sovereignty, independence, pride, strength, Jewish pride, Jewish strength. How many underground members were killed and murdered? How many soldiers, how many Jews have paid the price in order that the Jewish state continues to exist independently, sovereign? 23,741 Jews who were willing to sacrifice, who were willing to pay the price. The date of the January 22nd revolution, it was January 22nd, but it was 1863. Not 1822. January 22nd, 1863. So folks, if we look today at the superpower in the land of Israel, understand that this was created only through the fact that the Jewish people decided to sacrifice themselves for the land of Israel. Because don't forget how pleasant it is to forget that this whole 9th of Av, tragedies, how did it begin? When the Jewish people did not want to come in the land of Israel. Remember that lesson. I was amazed at one of these Jewish websites, one of these redemption websites. During these 3 weeks where we should be striving to come closer with our love to the land of Israel and moving to the land of Israel and embracing the land of Israel, somebody puts up a video of a rabbi discussing whether we should come to the land of Israel. If it wasn't tragic, it would be humorous. A rabbi of our day who lives somewhere outside the land of Israel, he's discussing whether today someone should come and live in Israel. It's an amazing thing. We're in these 3 weeks because the spies did not want to come into the land of Israel. Do you think for a moment that they did not have numerous amounts of good reasons why not to come here? Much better than perhaps us today? And they were proven wrong by the one above. Can you imagine that during these 3 weeks? That's what we're concentrating on? By some rabbi discussing whether it's a commandment to come to the land of Israel or not? So folks, understand something. When the Jewish people in the last 300 years said yes to self-sacrifice, said yes to coming back to the land of Israel, this was the cornerstone of the redemption, of our independence, of the rebuilding of the third temple. And the foundation is a foundation of self-sacrifice. Doesn't have to be giving our lives. It has to be giving our time, giving our money, being willing to pay the price, be willing to be made fun of, trampled upon, arrested, beat up, to stand in the front lines. And that is why we see a tremendous power today, a tremendous light in the land of Israel, all due to the last 300 years where we lifted the candles of the revolution of Hanukkah. One might say, what about the Holocaust? 6 million? Much more than 23,741. Okay, there were hundreds of underground Jewish fighters pre-State of Israel, 1948, gave their lives. True. There are thousands of people for the last 300 years that came to Israel and they gave their lives, gave up their lives, sacrificed to come here. True. But 6 million? Let me tell you something, folks. We've discussed this before you can go back to the Poway attack in Los Angeles. You could go back in I think Pomona or Pasadena, California. You could go back to the Pittsburgh massacre in the synagogue over there. You can go back and there's many discussions. We have classes on the subject. When a person is not given the choice whether to be Jewish or not be Jewish, he's just killed randomly. Is that considered to be a sanctity of God's name? Okay, there are various opinions. We discuss them then. But it's very simple, and you cannot compare the two. When you are given no choice, of course these people, they have a special sanctuary, as the Zohar writes. Jews that were killed by Gentiles have a special sanctuary in heaven that they exist. Of course, it's all true. Of course, but you cannot compare a person that says, yes, I am on my own initiative, my own free will. My answer is self-sacrifice for the land of Israel, for the Torah of Israel. It's a whole different ballgame over here. You know, people talk about the religious Jews that do not go to the army. That is a big farce. Let me tell you why. Because if you ever saw the statistics, how many secular Jews in Israel do not go to the army, then we would keep quiet, we would shut our mouths when it came to the religious population. So even though there is a law in Israel that you have to fight in the army, there are thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of people who evade the army. And once again, we're not talking about religious people. So it is a choice. It is a choice that a person says, I'm going in. I'm participating. I'm coming up to the land of Israel. There is a free choice here. And that is why we've had such a speed up, acceleration in the redemption process. That is why we are so close. Because what we've talked about for the last two classes, how the temple was destroyed because of lack of self-sacrifice, the temple will be built because of self-sacrifice. And we haven't seen so much self-sacrifice by choice since the last 300 years. So that's an amazing thing. So the idea, folks, is when you look at the amazing fact that we're talking about the fast of the 9th of Av. Did you ever think about it? 9. 9 is a famous number in Judaism, right? 9 is the time when there's a birth. A person is born. It's a tremendous creation from zero, from nothing, to existence. So, we either have on Tisha B'Av, we have the number 9, and instead of existence, which is supposed to come after 9, we had the total annihilation of the Jewish people. Total annihilation of independence, of sovereignty, of the land of Israel. On the other hand, we have the 9th month of the year. What's the 9th month of the year? Hanukkah. Amazing. the same letter, 9. This represents Jewish self-sacrifice. This represents revolution, sovereignty, independence, as in the time of the Maccabees, as in our days. 9 verses 9. Not only that, there's a law in the Code of Jewish Law in 5:9, verse 3. It says there in the Jewish Code of Law that a person on the 9th day of Av, you blow out all the candles except for one. Very interesting. Because the opposite of the 9th of Av is the 9th month of the year is Hanukkah, where we light up the candles. How many when we have our menorah where we light the candles, how many places are there? There are 9. Once again, the number 9. When was the Messiah born? After the destruction of the Second Temple, when was the Messiah born? On the 9th day of the month of Av. That's why in the afternoon we have a little bit of a relaxation of the various prohibitions that were on us from the evening. So once again, if you see the number 9 in your dream, the Talmud tells us, in the end of the tractate of Brachot, this is a good sign. The first time that the letter Tet, 9, appears in the Torah is in the word Tov. When God creates light, Tov. 9th is good. So folks, we have in Alexandria, we have a story. It began on the 9th day of Av, and it ended in the 9th month of the year, on Hanukkah. Is that just haphazard? Was that by chance, these two events? No, they are connected. Lights, revolt, independence, sovereignty, the land of Israel, temple, the 9th month of the year, taking the example of Hanukkah to guide us. The opposite, darkness, turn off the lights, blow out those candles. Exile, darkness. The opposite side, on the 9th day of Av. We have the choice to continue. Which 9 do we want to continue? The 9th day of Av, the exile, the fasting, the mourning, or to go down the path of the 9th month of Hanukkah and learn the lessons and live those lessons of self-sacrifice and bring upon the rebuilding of the third temple in our times.